Hello, I am Baal Kadmon, and I'd like to thank you for watching and or listening to this podcast. In this particular one, I'm continuing our discussions of the Demon Queens of Judaism. In the last one, we spoke of Machlat. One before that, we spoke about Agrat Bat Machlat. In this one, we're going to cover Naamah or Naamah. And she is very well known, second only to Lilith in terms of people knowing her name. And part of the series is to sort of introduce you to these quote unquote demon queens. I'm giving you the basic information, stuff that may not be as easily accessible outside of, I guess you could say, the Jewish fold, so to speak, because a lot of the content written is for an audience that they're assuming knows a lot of the texts or sort of understands like certain concepts, the names of the texts and all of that. And if you've taken any of my programs or read my books, you know that I try to make it more accessible to everyone. So as I've said, in this video, we're going to discuss Naamah. And I have to tell you, she's very interesting. So very elusive. Whereas with Lilith, a lot of the background is very apparent, like she's out there. But Naamah is a little bit different because in Genesis chapter 4, verse 22, we see that there is a Naamah. She is the daughter of Lamech from the lineage of Cain. And the verse reads, Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Now that's all we know about her from the Old Testament. It's a passing mention of Cain's genealogy. Yet that is very critical because that alone, the fact that she is from the lineage of Cain, was enough to spark centuries of interpretation. In biblical times, it was unusual for a genealogy to name a daughter at all. So later readers sensed, wait a minute, Naamah is special. Because remember, it's always son of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, and they bore son of so-and-so. This is now we're seeing Naamah, right? We're seeing her name. So it stood out. So in Jewish tradition, they seized on that mystery, and then they started to embellish her story with, all sorts of various, biographical details. And over time, she evolved from a very minor biblical name into a character of, in a demonic character. And in some stories, she becomes Noah's wife, while in others, she transforms into this, seductive sort of demoness. And it's so interesting, like how did one obscure figure come to wear so many different masks, right? So in this podcast, we're gonna go a little bit into that. Now, like I said, the earliest mention of Naamah, is obviously in the Bible. We saw that she's the sister of Tubal-Cain. But then in rabbinic literature, it presents two different portraits of her. Right, one is virtuous and one is quote unquote wicked. Now, on the virtuous side, many of the sages identified Naamah as the wife of Noah, who, of course, as you know, of Noah's Ark. Now, in that view, her name Naamah means pleasant or lovely. There's a term that used in Hebrew today when something is sort of pleasant. It's naim, right? So Naamah and naim are coming from the same root. So in that one portrayal, she's reflected as this righteous character. All her deeds were pleasant, And Genesis Rabbah, which is an exegetical text, explains that she was called Naamah because her deeds were lovely and pleasant. So this, on the surface, indicates, she's a woman of upright conduct, right? By making Naamah Noah's spouse, the rabbis are saying that, she is goodness. This is the one good seed that came from Cain's line, right? That survived the flood. One commentator put it that she was famous in her generation as a righteous woman who bore righteous children and who would, of course, be the future progenitors of humanity. But there's a quote I read. It says, "She is a small remembrance of Cain, or rather, a small remembrance of Cain was left in the world." In other words, not all of Cain's legacy was cursed, and Naamah's goodness, ensured that something of Cain's lineage would be reborn into the world in a positive way. Now, of course, that is not the common idea of Naamah. The more common ones, which are also the other rabbinic legends, cast Naamah in a far more different light, right? According to an alternative view, in the same book, in the Genesis Rabbah, Naamah's name was interpreted very differently. Rather than, pleasant indeed, it was said that she would beat on a drum to draw people to idol worship, right? So this links her name to Ne'imah, which is sort of like this old-timey word for melody, right? So it hints that she used alluring music for, whatever nefarious ends she had. Now, in this type of telling, Naamah becomes this portrait of corrupting entertainment, right? She's a woman who uses musical charms and lures people into immorality and idolatry and various different things, right? In the Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, which is an Aramaic translation and interpretation of the Old Testament, I wrote a book on the Targumim, by the way. It states, for the same line of Genesis chapter 4, verse 22, it says, Naamah, they describe Naamah as the mistress of elegies and songs. So she was very much linked to music. And of course, because this was written by certain individuals, they considered music to be maybe a little bit seductive. So that's one way or one aspect of her that was reinterpreted. Now, interestingly enough, there are a few interpretations that occupy sort of a more neutral ground, right? For example, one tradition recorded in the Zohar, more the Zohar Chadash, or the New Zohar, says that Naamah simply shared her brother Tubal-Cain's talents. So that means that, in one of the rabbis, Rabbi Abahu, he teaches that Naamah was expert in the working of brass like her brother. So this is sort of implying that the Torah's mention of her is to credit her for being an accomplished, craftswoman alongside her brother Tubal-Cain. Now, this that interpretation sort of sticks to the plain meaning of the text, and just talks about her skill without casting any type of moral judgments on her. But then, as we progress in these interpretations, things start to change. Okay, we start to see Naamah becoming more and more, I guess you could say, dark, right? So if we go deeper, there's a text called Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, and it states that Naamah is now linked to, and this is what I mentioned in my previous video about her, she's linked to the time just before the flood, right? Remember when the sons of God, chapter 6 of Genesis, when the sons of God, the fallen angels, when they beheld the daughters of men, right? And they took them as wives and all of that. Now, according to these legends, right? And again, I covered this in a previous video. I'll link that below. It was Naamah's beauty that was so extraordinary and just being sort of alluring and things of that nature that it was her doing that triggered the descent of these angels to earth. And it sort of implies that it was intentional. She ministered to these angels and they went astray, essentially. Now, the idea appears in Bereshit Rabbah, and one of the commentators, Ramban, who's Nachmanides, said that she was very beautiful. She was a very beautiful woman in whom the sons of God erred. So again, it casts Naamah as this is sort of like this femme fatale, but not just for humans, but like, on a cosmic scale. Her role in seducing the Watchers ultimately helps explain why the world became so corrupt. Right? So it's a very interesting twist, because we wouldn't have guessed that, right? Whereas we have on the other side, we have, again, what I mentioned earlier, that Naamah might have been Noah's virtuous wife in another account. So there's this dichotomy, right, that shows how fluid her character was in all of these early tales. Clearly the rabbis were intrigued by Naamah's story, right? Her untold story, right? Because remember, there was nothing in the Bible really about her. Now, by the close of the period in which these books were written, the Midrash, Naamah's identity had branched into all of these different paths, salvation, to the very gates of damnation. So to follow her, sort of her trail, you have to sort of venture deeper into Judaism to see how intense her darker persona became. So in the Kabbalah, which really peaked in medieval times, at this point, Naamah, there was almost no redeeming qualities. The Kabbalah, Zohar recast her into this, primordial demon woman. There was no way to get around it this time. She fully emerged as a counterpart of Lilith. And she shared Lilith's sort of notoriety as being a child killer, child stealer, snatcher, rather, seducer, and she goes, and she becomes sort of one with her in some way. Now, for example, in one Zohar passage, it relates that after the murder of Abel, Adam separated from Eve for 130 years. Now, during that time, Lilith and Naamah seduced Adam, and they bore him all of these demonic offspring. And these demonic offspring are the ones, they're the malignant spirits, right? So that's another way to explain, the origin of all these demons, that they're really a byproduct of Adam's sin and, this interaction between Lilith and Naamah. Now, I would say that if we go back to the Zohar Chadash, right, we start to see even clearer statements of Naamah's demonic and being as a demonic entity. And it's just really interesting because the same text can have all these conflicting ideas, and you'll find this throughout Jewish exegetical texts. Now, in that one of the passages says, "She was the mother of demons, she bore them, for behold, the mother of Ashmadai, king of demons, is named Naamah." And Ashmadai, as you might know, is Asmodeus, who's of course very well known in Judaism and in the occult arena. He's very well known. Now, we go back to the interpreter Ramban, or Nachmanides, and he cites a tradition that says that Naamah mated with a demon prince named Shamdon, and gave birth to Asmodeus, right? And that's how they link it together. So he sort of added, basically saying, yes, what was written in Zohar Chadash that she bore Asmodeus is true, So being the mother of Asmodeus eventually earned her that title, the mother of all demons, in some of the texts. So it's a very powerful statement. Now, Kabbalists elaborated on Naamah's role even further, right? So we have Rabbi Bahya ben Asher, who wrote that 4 women became the mothers of demons. It was Lilith, Naamah, Igrat, and Machlat. Okay, who obviously we're covering all 4 of them in this series, and we're going to cover one more, Eshet Zinonim, but that's for another time. So each of these demon queens commands different legions of evil spirits and reign over particular seasons of the year. And Naamah stands alongside Lilith as the queen of demonic forces. And then later stories frequently paired them together, like they would do everything together. So, for example, like Lilith, Naamah's main occupation is described as seducing men in their dreams and causing them to have wet dreams. And therefore, from their, from those nocturnal emissions, all of these demons are spawned, right? But also, like Lilith, she was blamed as being a threat to children, especially at night. And so she was sort of like Lilith's accomplice in strangling infants, according to multiple sources. Now, it's interesting to note that these later tales portray Naamah as a physical mortal woman and then became an inhuman spirit. So she was at once human and then became a demoness. So it's very interesting because we don't have that with Lilith. We do have that, though, with Mahlat, as I mentioned, in Igrat Bat Mahlat, because remember, they are part of the Genesis lineage. If you remember in the previous video, they're tied to Esau, Jacob's brother, and from the lineage of Ishmael. So I guess the question is how do they make sense of these divergent portrayals of Naamah? And some commentators, Jewish commentators themselves, sort of grappled with that question, right? Because it's sort of impossible, right, that she is the righteous wife of Noah, who is probably one of the most righteous individuals in the Bible. Would he marry a woman who became the mother of demons? So it was very problematic. So these later versions and stories split Naamah into two characters. Some sources tried to resolve the conflict by positing that Noah's wife was a different Naamah, right? Perhaps it was the Naamah, the Naamah, the daughter of Enoch, right? Distinct from the Cainite Naamah who turned demonic. Maybe this allowed one Naamah to remain virtuous, right? While the other would carry the sins of seduction. It's possible. So it sort of branches out right into these two Naamahs. One is pleasant, one is a quote-unquote idolater and demon. And so she goes from righteous woman to a beautiful temptress. So the solution, obviously, is really very typical of rabbinic thought when faced with these contradictory traditions, and there's tons of them, okay? Just on the concept of evil alone, it's, when did evil start? Actually, it started in the Garden of Eden, whereas other rabbis said, no, it started with the fall of the angels. No, it started when Adam and Eve were cast out. You see what I mean? So you're going to find a lot of these contradictory traditions preserved within Judaism. And then there are like outskirts sort of cautionary tales out there that's saying, the two faces of Naamah are just a classic moral lesson, right? Even from dark origins, goodness can emerge, or, stuff like that. It's, but it isn't very clear, who she is in that context. Is she the Tubal Cain, or is she, is she related to them in any way? So there's a lot of conflict about her. But as we know, she's relatively little, and not many people know about her, but obviously becoming more increasingly they are, because, when we compare her to Lilith, yet she is now basically tied to her. Naamah, especially in the occult, is definitely known as quote-unquote demoness, and so many people work with her. Now, I will say I will have a course on her. I don't know when I'm going to release it yet. I have a lot on her. It'll probably be sometime this year, maybe closer to the winter time, because I just released the Sefer Yetzirah one, which, wow, I couldn't believe the reception, because that was the first one people picked when I sent out the survey not too long ago. But it probably will be sometime in the winter, which is fitting because that's a nice time to sort of learn about some of this stuff. So that's it for this video. In the next one, I'm going to be discussing Lilith. A lot of you already know about Lilith, but this, this series wouldn't be, complete without Lilith. And then after that, we'll touch upon Eshet Zinunim. So anyway, that's it for this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. And like I said, the Sefer Yetzirah program is out. The link is in the description. And I hope you're well. Speak to you soon. So mote it be.